All right, if we would all please stand, and we'll begin with a prayer. O Lord and Master of my life, do not permit the spirit of laziness and meddling, the lust for power and idle talk to come into me. Instead, grant me, your servant, the spirit of prudence, humility, patience, and love. Yes, Lord and King, give me the power to see my own faults and not to judge my brother, for you are blessed into the ages of ages. Amen. All right. All right, this week we are continuing with our series 2, which takes us more into the church practical and the sacraments of the church. Last week we spoke a little bit about the church as a whole. If there was any questions that we have following up from last week's class, if not, we'll just continue. So the place of worship is the place where the people of God gather to celebrate the blood, the sacrifice. That is the divine Eucharist. It is called in the church the nous or the ecclesia. Ecclesia is the church. I'll often make mention of this is the ecclesia, and the micro ecclesia, the micro church, is our home. We're invited to take what we have here back into our homes, partly why we will have icons in our house, a little prayer corner, and so forth, because it's an imitation of the ecclesia of the church. In heaven, on earth, in which the heavenly God dwells and walks about. Saint Hieronymus of Constantinople. So the house of the Lord, the church, is heaven on earth, in which the heavenly God dwells and walks about. The first Christian church was the upper room of Zion, where Jesus celebrated the Last Supper. It was there that Christ handed on to his disciples the mystery of the divine Eucharist and spoke to them about God's love. And so we bring this all together in the sense of the Eucharistic sacrifice. So in the upper room, after Christ's ascension, it was in the upper room that after Christ's ascension, the Mother of God, together with the apostles, constantly devoted themselves with one accord in prayer and supplication. So they constantly devoted themselves one accord in prayer and supplications. We get this from the book of Acts. The house church, in the times of the Holy Apostles, the mysteries of the divine Eucharist was celebrated in the Christian homes, in the churches. It wasn't until much later that we see the development of the church as we know it today. But the house church, it was usually the wealthy people of the community who had a bigger house that could provide space for all the people. It wasn't very long till after the crucifixion, resurrection, that those declaring Christ to be the Christ, declaring Jesus to be the Christ, that the Jews were expelled from the synagogues. So immediately after the resurrection, like the immediate time after that, you would still see the disciples and others observing the Sabbath day and going to the synagogues that was their practice even with Jesus. But it wasn't long after that where they're like, you're not welcome here anymore. So they were left to have a space in their homes. After that, we see the church of the catacombs. The 2nd century saw the beginning of the construction of building dedicated exclusively to the worship of God buildings. However, when the persecution of the Christians began, the catacombs became the place of daily worship. The catacombs is where they buried the dead. And once they were ejected from the synagogues, they brought it into their homes, and then it became a persecuted religion, so they had to go underground. I met a group here in Fort Worth, and I'm sure we have groups like this everywhere. Their intent was to create or recreate the 1st century church. So they had regular meetings in members' homes once a week to worship. They sang songs of praise and did the readings together. They didn't subscribe to any one denomination or any one doctrine. They actually wanted to avoid the idea of denominational. Um, but as we see, as the church grew up, she went through different growing pains, if you will, from homes until the home wasn't big enough, to buildings solely for worship, until persecuted. Then the church was driven underground, the catacombs, offered the faithful security bestowed by the presence of God. Later, when the Christians could worship the Lord in freedom, they built beautiful churches everywhere. This one group came to us, and essentially once a month they would go to a traditional house of worship, a church, to learn about our practices and our traditions. And they explained to me that their goal was to recreate or to assimilate the older practice of the church houses, the home churches. And I actually met another missionary who isn't far from here, was using his house as a place of worship. And with the first group, I asked them, so what time, at what juncture of your community will you start doing it in the cemeteries? And they're like, well, what do you mean? I'm like, well, that was the progression of the church from the church homes, and then they went to the cemeteries and prayed in pride, in secret. And then eventually they would build their church. They didn't like that progression. They just wanted to stay in the homes. And then with the missionary, the pastor I met, he said he encounters a common problem. They meet regularly in his home, but when it's time to do worship, they're kind of disorganized and disheveled. And I thought about it and I said, I know your problem. You're trying to make worship in your living room and you're trying to socialize in your place of worship. We don't have a designated space. We just use the one space common for everything. And as we see, as we develop into a church, what sets it apart from the community center is that this is consecrated for the worship of God, for that purpose. My daughter recently asked me if her boyfriend can invite his choir to do a concert here because the acoustics are fantastic. And I said it would not be appropriate. This is not a concert hall, but it's a place of worship. To bring a secular choir in the church would be inappropriate. If it was a church choir, St. John's does it all the time. They bring in a Romanos choir or a Byzantine choir. That is appropriate, but a secular choir wouldn't be appropriate because this place is reserved. Totally would give her the space in the community center because that would be appropriate. It's for community gatherings. But as we go from the house church to the catacombs, once the church is legalized, they start building what is common to them. In 313 AD, Constantine the Great issued the Edict of Milan, which made Christianity an officially recognized and tolerated religion in the Roman Empire. It also granted Christians restoration for all property seized from them during the Diocletian persecution. St. Constantine began construction of Hagia Sophia on and it became the Megalo Ecclesia, the great church. It becomes the crown of Christendom as it is built and it expanded and withstood earthquakes and so forth. And so St. John Chrysostom says, the house of God is the school of spiritual life. The stillness that reigns there moves you to awe and teaches you how to live spiritually. It lifts you up from earth to heaven. So the church is a spiritual harbor where the peace of God reigns. St. Athanasius says, so that we turn our gaze towards paradise in imitation of the paradise of Eden, which was planted eastwards. As we sail the sea of life, we are journeying toward the light that knows no evening. A holy church is the sacred place there, the faithful experience, the presence of God, because God himself dwells there. That is why after the church has been consecrated, we no longer call all the church simply a house, but a holy house. And I mentioned before, as God calls us to be holy because he is holy, we may have ideas of what holiness looks like, what holiness is, but the simplest of it is God is completely unlike us because he is the creator. We are made of the dust of the earth, the inbreathing of God, flesh and blood, all these things. We are creation. What makes him holy in the simplest way of understanding it is he's not creation. He's the creator. And he calls us to be holy as he is holy. And that in a way is to be set apart from the rest of creation. When we consecrate the church, we set it apart from the rest of creation to make it holy. It's not for casual use. That's why we bless our homes to set our homes apart from casual use to be to be our micro ecclesia, to be our small church where we worship God. Saint Simeon of Thessaloniki, because it has been sanctified by the Holy Father through the All-Holy Son in the Holy Spirit and is the dwelling place of the Holy Trinity, when we go into a church, we enter a heavenly palace. We walk into places radiating the light. Every holy church is a piece of heaven on earth. And I get this from Christians of the Western mindset to say simply, the church is the people, and the building is just a building. They even go further to say that people are just bodies and shells. When they die, their bodies are just like empty shells because it's all about the soul. I see this as a poor understanding, and much like the early heresy of Gnosticism, with a strong contrast or conflict between the material world, which is evil and not of God, and the immaterial, which is good and solely from God. They lack or have lost the concept of holiness and sacred space. After all, it's the body that is baptized that the soul benefits. It's the body that receives the Holy Eucharist that the soul benefits. But how Saint Simeon, Athanasius, and John Chrysostom have described, the church becomes intuitive to the spiritual experience. So it's not just the building. And I mentioned last time, God is everywhere, but this is the well of spirituality that we come to drink from within the bounds of the church. So the different parts of the church. When we enter the church, we first pass through the narthex. That's the first room where we light our candles. A porch or antechamber to the main part of the church. This is where the catechumens used to be instructed and where they stood when attending the first part of the divine liturgy. The penitents, those who have committed serious sin and have confessed and repented of them, also used to remain in the narthex. In the monastic churches, there is a further area between the narthex and the main part of the church called the laity. Here, the service bearing the same name is held at all night vigils. It also is here that the service of the Compline and midnight office and the ninth hour are read. But in typical parish churches, you come into the narthex and then you come into the nave. Some notice during the liturgy of pre-sanctified gifts, we start prayers that say, all catechumens depart. Let no catechumens remain. Did you pick up on that? Let no catechumens remain. And historically, in the ancient church, you would have been asked to leave because the first part of the service was for everyone. But the second part of the service was restricted to those who already baptized and chrismated in the church because they were preparing to receive Holy Communion. For the catechumens, they were preparing to be baptized and chrismated in the church. And then also, this would have been during a time of persecution where we still have in the liturgy today, when the priest or the deacon shouts out, the doors, let us be attentive. It was the doors, let us be attentive. The recitation of the Nicene Creed would have been after the departure of the catechumens. And someone would be set to guard the doors. During the time of persecution, you only want the initiates in the church during the time of the confession of faith of the Nicene Creed. You only want the initiates in the church during the time of Holy Communion as well. in another way of understanding it, those who are catechumens, they weren't initiated yet, and they didn't necessarily have the commitment or the devotion, or I would imagine like the trust of the community yet, because under time of persecution, it just takes one to, hey, everybody, this is the Christians here. They're worshiping here when it was illegal. And so those who are not initiated were asked to leave at the time. I went to the monastery in Arizona, the St. Anthony Monastery, and I had my brother with me who is not Orthodox, and we were visiting the different chapels, taking a look in. And in one of the chapels, they were doing a memorial service, and they came up to us right away and they said, "I'm sorry, non-Orthodox are not allowed to stay in the church." And my brother was like, "I'm out of here," because he gets anxiety about the church. I was in plain clothes. I didn't know we were coming to the monastery. And so they just assumed we were just pilgrims or visitors, and they asked us to leave. Monasteries, you will find, are more strict in that regard. When we enter the narthex, we are called to leave our troubles of the world outside as we receive the King of all, invisibly escorted by the angelic hosts. We sing that during the great entrance of the liturgy. But I am the light of the world. He who follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life, from the Gospel of John. We do many things when we enter in the church. We light our candles. And people will ask, why do we light our candles? And this quote says it all. Christ is the light of the world. He who follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of light. We light our candles in a way of imitating his light. Obviously, Jesus Christ is not a candle or a flame on a candle, but it represents he is the light of the world. We are called to imitate that light. Also, we light our offering candles as a physical expression of prayer and hope. We say our prayers for one's personal needs, or that of a family member or a friend. You come in, you light a candle, you offer your prayer. Candles are lit before icons as a sign of one's faith and hope in God's help that is always sent to all who turn to him, and his saints with faith and prayers. We venerate and kiss the icons of Jesus, of the Theotokos, of the various saints, to show first and foremost love, reverence, and honor to those depicted in the icon. In practice, when lighting a candle in the church, the faithful usually make a monetary offering to the church. By lighting a candle and offering a prayer, one enters into a closer contact with the church and her ministry to the faithful, invisibly warming the soul by the visible light of the candle. In the historic church, they would often make offerings as they offer their prayers. They would bring candles with them as part of their offering. Today, it's hard to find beeswax candles, to bring our own candles. So the church provides that, and in a way, the people make a contribution for the candle, because that's what they would have traditionally brought, was the candle. There's an interesting movie online where it was about the candle maker in the church, and how important was that they get their candles for the year. In this regard, it's a physical representation of our immaterial prayers that we offer up to God. It's a way of our offering something for our prayers, rather than just an expectation that God will hear our prayers. Used to be the faithful would bring candles, olive oil, bread, wheat, and wine as offerings as well, for the benefit of the church, to be used by the church for the holy services, and also for the benefit of those in need. Now, few people still do, usually on feast days or days of memorials. They'll bring the olive oil, the bread, the wine for communion, and sometimes they bring candles. But these all come from the tradition where they were providing the basic necessities for the church, for the services, and for those in need. So like Andidoro at the end of the liturgy is a remnant of the distribution to the poor. When people would come to get help and assistance from the church, this is one of the last offerings that we still make from the offerings of the people. The nave is this space. So from the narthex, we enter into the main body of the church, which is called the nave. This is where the faithful stand during the celebration of the holy mysteries and of the holy services. Sometimes people will ask me about Western influences on the Orthodox Church, and I will tell them, you are sitting in the pews. The pews are the Western influence. Traditionally, we would stand in prayer. We stand in the celebration of the resurrection. And so the proper posture is standing. If you're ever wondering, should I stand or sit? In most cases, you're never wrong to stand. And then also with the nave, we can think of it as the Latin term, like for the body. So the people come in here and they make up the body of the church for worship in here. And if we had a dome, you would see that Christ is the head of the body, and we are the people, the arms and the legs of the body of Christ. Christ is the high priest. The bishop is the living icon of Christ. This is Metropolitan Isaiah. He is retired. He ordained me. The right-hand side of the nave is dominated by the throne of Christ as the high priest, and of his living image, the bishop. On the throne, it's the icon of the great high priest of Christ. He's dressed like a bishop, and the bishop is dressed like the emperor from the time of old. On the left-hand side is the pulpit. Oh, we kind of have a pulpit. The ambon, which in earlier times was situated in the center of the nave, from which the deacon reads the gospel. In a more traditional setting without the pews, there'd be an elevated space in the middle of the church where the bishop would be vested in view of the community, where we would read the gospel. At the eastern end of the church is front of the holy sanctuary. There is an elevated part called the soleus. To the right and left of the soleus are the lecterns for the church, for the choir and the chanters. So this step here leads you up to the solea, where we have the chant stand. And in a traditional setting, there'd be a left and a right choir of chanters that sing antiphonically back and forth. We kind of have that with the choir here and the chanters up on top. The most sacred part of the church is the holy sanctuary, the ero vima, or the ero, meaning the sacred. It is separated from it is separated by the iconostases, a screen bearing icons, which in the early years of the church took the form of simple low, like a banister, a low banister. So behind the iconostases is the altar. We call it the ero. The iconostases usually has 3 doors. The central one is called the beautiful gate, which we have the icon of the Annunciation, also known as the royal doors, and has double doors on which the Annunciation of the Theotokos is customary depicted. It is used only by the clergy during the celebration of the holy services. So it's not a quick access into the altar, but only during the services. Otherwise, we would use the deacon doors. Our building doesn't actually have the doors for the deacon doors, but we have an easy access. Although someone asked me recently, when Jim is ordained, are we going to get doors? And I said, no, that's not part of the plan. So with the iconostases, Jesus Christ, John the Baptist, and St. George. Jesus is always to our right of the beautiful gate. And to the right of him is always St. John the Baptist. Additionally, saints may be part of the iconostases, which we have St. George, the great martyr. But in other communities, you'll see other saints there. Usually it's the preference of the community, but always Jesus and St. John the Baptist. On the left side of the gate is always the Theotokos. To the left of her is always the patron saint of the church. The saint of the church is dedicated to Saint Dimitros, so we have Saint Dimitros. Additional saint may be included. We have Saint Barbara, the great martyr. And then our iconostasis is flanked by the holy archangels Gabriel and Michael. The iconostasis is like a heavenly firmament separating the intelligible from the material, dividing off the holy sanctuary where the sacred mysteries are celebrated from the nave. The holy sanctuary symbolizes heaven itself, where the throne of God stands and is always situated at the eastern end of the church. There are rare occasions where the church does not face east, or the iconography is different. And usually I would say it's usually wrong, but they may be repurposing a building for the church and the direction of it sets it off, or the limited space that they have for the church made them rearrange the iconography. But this is traditional and typical of what you'll see in any Orthodox church. I was before I was assigned here, I was in Annunciation in Houston, and then there was a particularly busy summer where I was filling in the church St. Nicholas in Corpus Christi, and then I filled in Transfiguration in Austin, and is there another one? Maybe between the three churches, Annunciation, St. Nicholas, and Transfiguration. And I remember I was somewhere for Vespers one evening, and as I'm finishing the prayers, we commemorate the name of the patron saint of the church. And I totally forgot where I was. Like, I don't know. And I looked at the icon, and it was the icon of the Transfiguration of Christ. I'm like, oh, I'm in Austin. So we commemorate the event of Transfiguration. But that's how you can always tell the name of the church is the patron saint on that icon. The holy sanctuary symbolizes heaven itself, where the throne of God stands and is always situated at the eastern end of the church. In earlier times, in the back part of the sanctuary, behind the holy altar, the holy table, the altar, was the synthrono, which consisted of one or more rows of thrones, which with a higher one in the middle, known as the cathedra of high, for the bishop. Where the height of the iconostasis increases, the synthrono fell into disuse, and the bishop's throne was placed in the nave opposite the throne of the emperor, which was known as the despotikon. The two thrones were meshed into one after the fall of Constantinople. We no longer needed the throne for the emperor because he was dethroned, and the bishop kind of played a dual role as the bishop of his community and the political leader of his community after the fall of Constantinople. At Holy Trinity in Dallas, we had the ordination. We had two bishops, Metropolitan Constantine and Bishop Anthony, and they actually have the synthrono in Dallas, and I've never used it before. And then to have two bishops. And so Metropolitan Constantine sat in the center throne, and to his right was the Bishop Anthony. And then the clergy line up in order of presvia. Presvia means seniority of ordination, and we line up to the right and left of the bishops. And so, as we're saying here, what started off as like a short banister continued to grow, and then we have a tall iconostasi. There are other iconostases that you have this layer of icons, But then there's another layer of smaller icons, usually consisting of like the 12 apostles, and then another layer of icons that would be like the feasts of the Lord and of the Theotokos. And I've seen some iconostasies that really stretch to the ceiling, and you can't see into the altar at all. And so I would see why like the synthrono would fall out of use. You can't hardly see it. And they take the throne, and this was during the reading of the epistle and the gospel. In the center of the holy sanctuary stands the holy table on which the bloodless sacrifice of the divine liturgy is offered. The holy table is the border between heaven and earth. It is the throne of glory and the dwelling place of God, the workshop of the gifts of the Holy Spirit. It is the paradise of Eden, there a wellspring from which poured forth physical rivers. From the sacred table, a spring wells up, which waters souls and raise them to heaven. Set the cathedral on high, place the bishop. All right. So Metropolitan Isaiah, at the consecration of St. Demetrios, he bears a little reliquary that had relics of different saints that will be put into the altar. So we did a procession around the whole church. And then when we finally come in, the altar is cleared away. There's a cavity in the altar table that you're able to make the deposit. We'll see it here. And the relics of the saints are placed in. There's a list of spices and incenses that are put in there. We used marble dust and beeswax to secure the relics inside the altar. Why do we do this? It was an extension of when we were celebrating the liturgy within the catacombs among the relics of the saints. And so instead of building churches where the saints were martyred, we now bring parts of the relics of the saints to the churches we build. So if the holy table has been consecrated, the relics of the holy martyrs will have been sealed in the center during the consecration service of the church. For the holy martyrs are the foundation of the church, which are built upon the primary foundation stone of Christ the Savior. I saw a question pop up. I'll get to that afterwards. Our relics, we consist of St. Panteleimon, the great martyr and healer. And we celebrate him July 27th. St. Barbara, the great martyr, December 3rd. And then the Holy Fathers martyred in the monastery of Pantokratoros in Dau Pantelis. And this is celebrated Tuesday of Bright Week. And essentially the story with these Holy Fathers was they were martyred on Holy Saturday at their monastery, like pirates or I don't know who came. They came and butchered them all. And throughout the whole monastery. So they were butchered in the church. They were butchered all over the property. And there were two monks, part of this community, that had gone to another monastery to chant for the services. When they returned, they discovered the massacre. And essentially they buried all the monks where they died. So in the church, around the property. And it wasn't until and then the monastery closed, right? Because it was a terrible massacre. Many years later, like a century later, new monastic life was brought to this monastery. And I believe it was a women's monastery that was taking over the space. And they came into the church and they were cleaning up, and there was strong fragrance, beautiful fragrance, not bad fragrances that you would think from. And essentially, they were able to recover all the monks in their burial spot, and they reclaimed them all in, I guess, proper burial for them. We were able to receive relics. The relics, we received them from the archdiocese, from the archbishop at the archdiocese for the consecration of the church. Oh, so every year we would celebrate these holy martyrs on Bright Week, Tuesday of the Bright Week. So Pascha is Sunday. It's the following Tuesday, Bright Week. The Antimission is a necessary component for the celebration of the Divine Liturgy. It is a piece of cloth which has been consecrated during the consecration of the church, which usually is imprinted with the image of Christ's descent from the cross. The Antimission is laid upon the Holy Altar during the celebration of the Holy Liturgy. So ours is actually similar to this. It's a new one. We had received a new one from Metropolitan Constantine, where you see the white stripe on the bottom of it is where it would bear the signature of the bishop. And Antimission means like a nut. I can't think of the term. Something with the table, like in another table, in lieu of the table, in lieu of the table. And so this becomes the holy altar when we consecrate the gifts. And if we go somewhere to celebrate liturgy, like we do at camp, we do summer camp in the woods somewhere, we would bring the Antimission. We don't necessarily have an altar. We would just use a regular table, but we would use the Antimission. If the church were to be like decommissioned, or the bishop and the community go separate ways, the bishop comes and takes the Antimission. This belongs to him, and he takes the priest because the priest belongs to him too. And so, like, when he takes that, you're not his parish anymore. When the altar table is consecrated, the bishop washes it, and the visiting priest, help wash it, and they anoint it with holy chrism, and then they anoint the whole altar table with holy chrism using the Antimission. So after the service, that's collected and distributed to the different churches in the metropolis. And so when Metropolitan Constantine came last time, he brought his own Antimission that bears the name of the Patriarch Constantinople, Patriarch Bartholomew, because, as I understand it, the bishop metropolitan cannot serve under another metropolitan's name. He serves under his patriarch. And then they consecrated a chapel in Houston, and they collected the Antimission and redistributed those to the different communities to replace our older Antimission. I was sad to see ours go, because ours bore our church name and Metropolitan Isaiah's name, and it was colorful. Now I have a black and white one, but it does have Metropolitan Constantine's name on it. Although when he was in Dallas this weekend, he used his own Antimission that had the patriarch's name on it. I noticed he's still doing that. So we are ordained and serve under our Metropolitan Constantine, and so we use his Antimission. He is enthroned by the Patriarch Constantinople, so he uses his Antimission. I think that's how we are to understand that. So the cloth icon of Christ, his descent from the cross, the holy oil, it's some traditions, and I think Russian traditions, sew in relics into the Antimission, although I haven't experienced that myself. But the OCA and the Russians always ask me, what relics are sewn in? I'm like, we don't do that. They're in the altar. And then it bears the signature of the bishop and identifies the church of consecration. During the consecration of the church, the holy altar is washed and anointed with holy oils, and the Antimission is used to rub the oil into the altar and into the Antimission. So we see that. The prothesis table at the north side of the sanctuary in the altar area is the prothesis table, usually an enclave-shaped area where the precious gifts, which later are carried solemnly through the church to the holy table during the great entrance are prepared before the divine liturgy. The service of preparation is called the proskymodie. So on Sunday morning, before Orthros begins, the priest begins the proskymodie service to prepare the bread and the wine for the divine liturgy. According to the liturgical symbolism, the holy prothesis signifies Bethlehem and the cave where Christ was born. That is why the icon of nativity is usually depicted in the apse above it. And so we have the icon of nativity here. And just as Bethlehem is close to Jerusalem and the holy sepulchre of the Lord, so the prothesis is near the holy altar. And so underneath the icon of the nativity, we have our little prothesis table, and then the altar is in center. During the proskymodie, we have the bread, the wine, and the water. We have the chalice, the paten, which is the disc that you see. Sometimes we call it the discos, not the disco. We have a spear, which I don't have a picture of it here, but it looks like the spoon, but instead of the spoon, it has a triangle, like a spear. And the spoon and the asterisk. The asterisk is it's I don't know how you describe it. It's a frame. It's a frame that sits over the gifts on the discos, and then you would have the coverings that go over the discos and the chalice, and then the coverings. And you see in this picture, in the center of the discos is the big square, and the big square is cut out of the prosphoro, the bread, and it becomes the gift, the doros. And you can barely see it. It looks like you can see X's, but it's the initials of Jesus Christos Nika. And if you look on the pews, you can see it engraved on the pews, the Jesus Christos Nika, and it's Jesus Christ conquers. That part of the prosphoro is cut out and put on the paten. To the hour left of it is a triangle, and the triangle is made up of two letters, the mi, which is an M, and the theta. The theta is a circle, Greek letter, circle with a line through the middle, and it represents the mother of God, Mite tu Theou, mother of God. And so the part for the Theotokos is cut out, and then the triangles off to the right of it are representative of the angels, the martyrs, the hierarchs, the mercenaries, the miracle workers, the wonder workers, and then the last one is cut out for the bishop of the liturgy. So St. John Chrysostom or St. Basil the Great, depending on the liturgy. And then the crumbs we see at the bottom of it, we commemorate the living and the dead of the community. So we have the directory, we have your lists, and we name each person that is being commemorated. And in a way, on the discos, the whole body of Christ is represented through the gift of Christ, the Theotokos, the angels and the saints, and then all the living and the dead members of our community. And that's put on the paten, processed through the church at the great entrance. And then after the consecration, the gift itself, the doros, is put in the chalice where everyone receives both the body and the blood of Holy Communion. Excuse me. On the north side, we have the prothesis table. On the south side, kind of parallel to it, is the diakonikon. You see it. And this is the sacristy where sacred vessels are kept and maintained under the deacon's care, hence the name diakonikon. And sacristy, holy vessels, the chalice, patens, not baptismal fonts, like water fonts, holy oil, blessing cross. These are all things that you might find on the right-hand side. We have an icon of the resurrection on top. Sometimes it is the icon of the resurrection in that enclave behind the table. Speaking with the iconographer, he suggested we do, I forgot, Melchizedek. Or, oh no, I have the icon of humility now, the bridegroom. There's a varying traditions about what icon goes there. I think that is the icon of St. John the Baptist. I think this is St. John the Baptist Church here in Euless. But these are the general spaces of the church when we come in, from the narthex to the nave to the solea, iconostases, and the altar area. And it's the altar area, the aero, the altar, they're used interchangeably, and sometimes we confuse people. Oh, put this in the altar. It's not actually in the altar table, but in the room of the altar. And sometimes, just it's hard to communicate the difference because we use the same word. The altar is the table, but we also refer to it as the altar room. The emissaries of Prince Vladimir, right? They were looking for a religion to unite the Slavic people, to create a better society for themselves. And they visited the different religious people, religious communities. And when they came to Constantinople and saw Hagia Sophia, we have this famous writing that he says, we knew not whether we were on earth or in heaven anymore. With the chanting, the lights, the incense, they felt transported. And in a way, we are to understand the church as this place of transformation, and to understand within the church, we progress. And I think I mentioned it last time, Holy Transfiguration and Austin, they show a beautiful progression in the way they did the stonework on the floor, where they had natural Texas stone leading up to the narthex, and then a nice granite in the nave, and then a beautiful marble as you ascend the solea into the altar. And we do something similar where we have this pattern in in the nave coming up to the solea. We have the solid white marble, and then in the altar room, it's the solid white marble to show this gradual ascension. And the solea is where we receive the sacrament. It's lifted up from the earth in a way, where we are, where we're baptized, we'll receive Holy Communion. We stand before the icon of Christ in confession. We are anointed with Holy Unction. We're married on the solea. We're buried from the solea. The only two sacraments that are in the altar are Eucharist, the Holy Communion, and the ordination of the deacon and priests, where everything else is done outside the solea. The Eucharist and the ordination are done on the altar. The deacon, the diaconate candidate, puts his hands down on the altar and kneels before the bishop. The bishop places his hands on the head of the candidate to ordain him to a deacon, and again to the priesthood. And so we get this ascension into the altar. And then the beautiful work of the iconostasis. I had someone complain. Someone always complains. We have like the gold background of the saints, and then the green ground where the saints are standing. And like there's this sharp contrast between the green and the gold. Like it's so weird. And I'm like, you don't know. It's this idea of where heaven and earth are joined together. And so, like, heaven descends to the earth and we are elevated to the heavens. And it's midway through for us, like from where we're standing and so forth, of the icons. And it's to give us this imagery, this effect that we're not just in a casual place. We're not just in a building. We're not just a simple gathering for any purpose, but for the one purpose of worshiping God, to emulate the lives of the saints in our own life, to ascend from the mundane to the sacred. Um, we'll see that in a lot of Christian traditions today, where they've lost all sense of sanctity, um, of holiness, and everything is the same. Everything's the same. And it just made me think of the Lego movie. I don't know if you saw the Lego movie where they just mindlessly sing everything is awesome, but it's all the same. But when we come together to worship, we're called not to be the same. We're called to be set apart. And then, as we leave, we're called to take this with us into the world. We are to be transformed here and transform the world by our own presence and involvement, transform the world around us. All right. All right, that's what I have for today. Next week, we'll discuss the icons and the sacred relics, the liturgical vessels, and the clerical vestments in more detail for next week. Let's see. What questions? What we're looking at there. Do we have any questions, Isaiah? I can't hear you. Okay, so we have candles here and right in front of the icons. And in a way, they are vigil candles. And for a similar purpose that we light them in the candle box, we bring them here and before a specific saint, whether it's Jesus or Panagia or Saint Demetrios and so forth, as a way to honor them. And usually it's a more personal devotion to those particular saints, asking for oftentimes something a little bit more specific. So I seem to think of it myself when I come into the narthex. It's kind of a general prayer that I offer on behalf of myself, with my family. Maybe I'll say like the Jesus prayer, Lord Jesus Christ, the Son of God, have mercy on me, a sinner. Or Lord Jesus Christ, have mercy on my children. That sort of thing as I light the candles. Or if I was like on my parents' memorial, I would light them, remember the souls of the servants of God, Apostolos or Elisabeth. I would light a candle for them there. But if there was a more pressing need or part of my devotion, we would light them up on the Solea. We have parish council do it to minimize traffic. Really, anyone should be able to light the candles. And same thing with these here in front. Usually it's in front of Panagia and Christ, and we have the icons next to them as well, as a way of personal devotion that we light our candles and offer our prayers that way. Anyone can have the candles up there. And like I said, the only reason why parish council does it is to help coordinate and minimize the up and downs. And, some of the old ladies, they want to do it themselves. And This was in Houston. We had a lady, she was lighting the candle herself, and she bent over to put it in its place, and her hair caught on fire. The deacon was sensing while she was doing this, and just like she started putting out her hair. So for now on, someone with short hair, you'll be perfect. Uh, and so to help minimize insurance claims and stuff like that. But it's an offering as part of their devotion, really. And so you'll see people, they'll light one candle for everybody. You'll see other people, they light 100 candles for everybody. Some will always light them in front of Christ. Some will always light them in front of Panaya. I remember I was going through a thing, and Father Lou is like, Father, do you have a vigil candle that you could put in front of Panaya? And he's like, it continues to burn throughout the week, and there's this idea that it's a vigil. I don't know, how would you describe a vigil? Like, we have a sense of what a vigil is. It's a long sense of prayer. Um, but it was because it's a week long, I could replace it the following week and have this constant vigil with Panaya for whatever the circumstance was. But it grows out of devotion and a different types of piety. So interesting question. And yeah, that's partly what we do. When the church has lots of icons, you will see favorites kind of emerge, and there's certain areas where when they pray before the icon, they ask for some kind of miracle, and when it happens, they come back and um, I've seen where they take their cross, their baptismal cross, and leave it as an offering for the Theotokos or for whatever. And so there's a chain that's strung across the icon full of people's baptismal crosses. Or do you know what it's called? The little plate, like a tin aluminum plate, like tokos or taki.
Yeah, it's like for like a body
Yeah.
part, kind of
So
leg.
yeah. So there's these aluminum, I don't know what they are, plates, and they have body parts on it, or pregnant woman on it, or head on it. And usually it was like, oh, help my withered hand, or help me get pregnant, or cure my what is it? What's the headache that never goes away? Migraines or whatever. And when they are cured of it, they come back and they leave it as a sign of devotion and thanksgiving. So we see that happen as well. So not just the candles, but these sort of things. Nicholas.
This is sort of words of blue or otherwise displaced in the model in sand. What happens to the icons, the things that get so easily put on?
So when we moved here from the old location, they brought the icons with them. What we would do here is not move. And actually, there was some question early on whether we would stay here. And we consecrated the church in 2018. I'm like, we're not going anywhere. And we started the iconography and we consecrated the church. They would have to come down if something happened that we had to leave. Like I don't know, we cut it out of the walls. We'd cut it out of the walls. I mean, we wouldn't leave it here for them to paint over it. That wouldn't be appropriate. They would come with us. Yes.
Works on this big wall painting, right? Here pretty much for other churches, and they're pretty much flat. They're painted something else and then applied.
Mhm.
So I imagine.
Right. So,
That would be not easy.
right. So what Daniel was saying, Holy Archangels, there's an iconographer there upstairs, right? And they have a Saint Demetrius chapel. Up until then, we were the only Saint Demetrius in our metropolis. Now we have a chapel to compete with. Um, and so our iconography wrote these icons in Greece, or probably more fairly to say in Barcelona, because every time he calls, he's in Barcelona. Um, and he shipped them to us and installed them. Now I had someone say, "Oh, it's like wallpaper." I wouldn't call it wallpaper, and it didn't cost like wallpaper. And so,
Extremely special wallpaper.
yeah, extremely special wallpaper. I'll tell you what, they shipped it to us from Greece, and I was out of town that weekend, which I didn't like shipping it to us. Like it finally came while I was out of town, and it's the only time, and I allowed them UPS um, leaves anything because they never leave anything. I always got to chase them down. I got to tell them hold it at the building because they want to deliver it after hours. It was rolled up like in a tube, and it said signature required. It was the only thing in English that said signature required. And they left it. They left it at the door. And it was raining, of course. And I'm like freaking out from Pennsylvania. And there were two tubes. They kept one and left the other one. So now I got to search for this other one. And they put it on the wrong truck. And I had someone meet the truck wherever they were to get it and bring it back. I'm like, you people are insane. So anymore, I don't like if I have to do UPS, they don't send it here. They send it to my house, and I try to get them to leave it. Um, these are painted on a canvas and brought. The ones that are happening right now at St. John's in Euless, he paints it right onto the wall. And that's more traditional. Takes longer. And like they're doing the dome right now. And he's got like a time capsule video. It's amazing to see. But those are the two ways of doing it. Samuel, you asked what occasion brought Metropolitan Bishop to Dallas. There was an ordination to the diaconate that happened in Dallas this weekend. And so their pastoral assistant finished the program at Hellenic College Holy Cross and was finally, God bless, to be ordained a deacon. And I imagine it won't be very long before he's ordained a priest. And that was Sam's wife. It's all right if you took credit for that question. My wife asked that question. Wasn't me, it was her. Ashton, I'm not sure how much we missed. Ashton, feel free to look at our our playlists on the YouTube, and you could find our previous classes. All of season one, all of season one of Adult Catechism is there, and we have moved into season two, series. Their name series one and series two, so you can check us out there on the YouTube page. Any other questions, Emily? On the arch. Opani nifti miter itakusa ton pandon ion iota ton logo. Okay. That was kind of close, but you knew what I was saying. All right. How would you, Mihaly, how would you describe that first word? All praised mother, right? How do you translate that? Say it again. See, he speaks the language and he's struggling.
Praiseworthy.
Most praiseworthy, who gave birth. All right. So almost praiseworthy, who gave birth to the Holy of Holies, Logon, the word. And so we sing that during the Akathis service. I believe it's the last one of the series that we sing, where it's one of the last phrases of the service, where we recognize her as the one who gave birth to the most holy of holies. So when we started the iconography project, the iconographer gave me like a draft of what things would look like. The icons were superimposed over the space. And I was just so excited. Like, we're finally doing it. And it didn't even occur to me everything was in Greek. I'm like, this is just so exciting. And they're like, what does it say? I'm like, and so everything's in Greek. And I imagine as we move forward, we'll do more English. But the hierarchs inside the altar, we have Saint Nicholas, Saint Gregory Theologian, Saint Basil, Saint John Chrysostom, Saint Athanasius, and Saint Spiridon. They all hold scrolls, and the writings in the scrolls come from the priestly prayers during the Divine Liturgy. And over time, I'm reading the Divine Liturgy, and I rarely say the prayers in Greek, but occasionally I'll look over and I'm like, wait a minute, and I find it in the saints. I have in my book, I identified which saint has which prayer, and I need to print up the little booklet of the saints that of the iconography, which explains all of that. But they're the priestly prayers from the Divine Liturgy. The one with Saint Barbara, her writing has something to do with her life. The one with Saint John the Baptist, it's repent for the kingdom of God is at hand. And the one with Jesus, I am the light of the world reading. And I think we'll go into more detail next week as well.
In one of the pictures during the consecration, all the priests had their
Antimission.
did each priest have their own in addition to the church having one, or why were there so many?
There were so many because the bishop would send them to all the parishes to update their antimission.
The ones from the parish.
Well, we bought all the antimission for our consecration. And then after the consecration, they're signed and the bishop sends them to the parishes that need antimission. The one we had from before, I still have it. I need to look to see who the bishop was. It was old. It was old. And some of them are in tattered shape. And so I would imagine some of the smaller communities in particular who don't get many bishop visits, but have regular services, theirs are pretty worn. And so we just kind of get an updated one. And it was nice to have our name on it for a while. It lasted a few years. And like I said, I'm like, I want one of the colored ones because you don't see them too often. And now we have a black and white one again.
It's a shame. Didn't frame it somewhere.
Right. And the antimission, we have the epitaphios on the Kuvukion, which it's a more elaborate icon of taking Christ off the cross, but it's like the antimission. And then during the liturgy, we open the antimission and the gifts are placed upon them and consecrated there. Tifa, you got a question? Would you like to share it with the rest of the class? I'm just kidding.
I just wanted to say that she was saying, she's like, oh, you know, we started going to the church and like how Bill purpose and we talked about how you know, some churches nowadays it's just like boxes. I was like, yeah, like, you know, and me being Protestant, I was like, yeah, you know, at first I didn't really think that was odd, you know, because how it was, you know, got the Western doctrine, all that stuff. So, just when we started working here, I was like, and I was just telling her, I was like, it's nice that the church or our church gives us this information of like how the church is built for purpose.
Right.
Everything. Like it is literally wow. It might have a altar or stage or whatever, but there's no real purpose in it. Some of them don't even have windows.
Well, I'll say about the windows. I'm going to interrupt you for a second to share with people online. Emily was saying like, it's nice that the Orthodox Church has a plan for their building. Like there's a purpose in the way in which it was built. And from above, looking from above, it's a sign of the cross. And each space had a purpose. Even I mentioned before, like the arches and the dome work is to reiterate this idea that, you know, God descended to the earth to be with us. He bent the heavens to be with us rather than someplace distant. Now, the idea is with the windows, it's not traditional to have windows lower level because you'd be looking out and see earthly things and distracting things and common things. What you'll see is traditionally windows at a higher level, especially in the dome, letting the light in. But it wasn't meant to be just aesthetic. Usually it's no windows on the lower level. We have the stained glass windows, which like an extension of the iconography, you know, would have that effect on it rather than, oh, I can see someone pulling up late. You know, we don't want that kind of distraction. Not that we ever pull up late. We're always on time. No comment.
Father, you've seen me at the meeting says, look at a picture of a Protestant church without the sound. And then you look at a concert without the sound, they look the same. There's the stage down front, and there's people in the crowd looking at it, and whether it's their cell phone that's up there.
Right.
It looks the same.
So Jim mentioned there's a meme online that if you took a picture of a concert or a picture of many of these mega churches, just without any context, it's hard to decipher which one's church and which one is a concert. There's a comedian, John Christ. Anyone familiar with him? He does a segment on his tours and online. Is it a church or a dispensary? And he'll be in California and it's like New Heights. Is it a church or a dispensary? And sometimes you get it right. Sometimes you're like, I think it's a church and it's a marijuana dispensary. I think it's a dispensary. Nope, it's a new church. And so and I get the use of like storefront churches as like part of your growth. And I met some people, they were a part of the Paradox Church. We have the Paradox Church down the street. It started off as a small community, as a small church. Are you familiar with this, Isaiah? Yeah. So it started off like kind of grassroots. And then they built this great traditional looking, almost a modern traditional looking church. Call it Paradox, which is interesting. I'm like, yes, it is a paradox, but and the people were visiting us saying it got very commercial real fast. Like our budget went from missions to media and marketing. And they were really put out by that. Kind of like, let's get back to worship. And now we're having committee meetings over marketing strategies and stuff like that. And I mean, location they shouldn't need marketing. They just need to be present. I mean, their location is great. Like, I like their location. But you'll see in the ecclesiology, the study of the church is lost in modern times, and it's just a building. It's an old Walmart. It's a basketball stadium in Houston.
The old Toyota Center.
The old Toyota Center. It's the Lakewood Church where you get your stadium seats. And well, the front seats are really nice. I pay extra for those though. And it's interesting. The kids are put somewhere else. The children are put somewhere else because you don't want them to interfere with your worship experience. And my thought is here, it could be distracting because, oh, it's the chanters, it's the choirs, it's a short sermon. But the acoustics are good, so the kids' voices carry. We're talking about a concert hall, and we don't want the kids making noise, But there's where the kids go. Well, it's our position that the kids should be here in worship with their family because we're all family. I remember growing up in the Lutheran church, I hated going to the Sunday school. I wanted it to be in the church with my parents. I didn't like meeting new people. Okay, that's true. I didn't know the people in the church and their security next to mom and dad. But I'm like, this is the worship. And otherwise, Sunday school was just more school. And I was less prepared for Sunday school as I was for regular school. But there's, people will ask me, where do I send the kids? I'm like, you keep them to yourself. We want you together. And so if also we have like a quiet room off the narthex. And the intent of the quiet room is if the kid gets a little wiggly, take him back to calm them down, to bring him back. They're like, where's the nursery? Like, there is no nursery. I don't want them to be rewarded for making noise to go play with toys. Bring them back in here because they belong in here. But I've been amazed with my own kids and with other kids. They may have things to distract them in church. I say bring in soft toys, like teddy bears and stuff like that, not things that fall and clink and clack and shatter. Don't bring Legos, right? Bring some, or what? Or a fire truck. Bring something soft. When it falls, nobody knows. And you always hear someone hit their head and the baby cries afterwards. But even my own kids, like they have their coloring books or, children's Bibles or soft toys. You'll hear them singing the songs later. Like you're exposed to it so much that they absorb it. They absorb it. But if they're not a part of it, they're not a part of it. We have a tradition, a modern tradition, and I've been working on against it, where we want the kids to do everything in the church because it makes a good photograph. So we used to have the kids read the epistles, and the Greek students can practice reading the Greek for everyone. And you can't always hear them, and they don't always read well, and it's not their fault. But we want them to be involved. Like, let's them learn to do these things rather than give it to the children to do. And so we have altar boys, but these were really adult positions in the church. And then, like when we did a Sunday of Orthodoxy, we did a procession of the icons. For a long time in many parishes, it's just the children who do it. I'm like, but it wasn't a childish thing to do. It was an adult thing to do. And so we're trying to, we graduate into doing these adult things, because the alternative was once they graduated, they stopped doing the childish things. And so I love having the college kids as altar servers. You don't just graduate and stop. I love having the older men do the altar service because it shows this is, as we grow in the church and grow in our faith, we advance to different roles and positions. It's not just for children. And then technically, the readers were sub offices and they're blessed by the bishop to do the readings. And it's meant to be, you're trained to do it, and they would chant them and intone them. And the kids, they're not getting to practice. They're not showing up on time. They're not enunciating well, as the bishop was driving in for me. Make sure you enunciate every word. But to recognize, as St. Paul says, everything should be done in an orderly fashion, not just my son's going to read, so I'm going to take a picture. It's not all about the picture. It's not all about the picture. But they should be here to see adults worshiping and leading as an example for them to learn to worship and lead, rather than us looking at the children doing it. The Sunday school it's usually like kindergarten through high school. And our groups are small enough that kindergarten to second grade, and then third to fifth or sixth grade, middle school and high school. And what was the second part? What are they learning? They're learning the gospel. Many times it's the gospel reading of the day, taken to a children's level and geared for that, or the sacraments or the feast day. And so you'll get the tradition of the church, you get the biblical reference to it, and then the sacramental significance for kindergarten. It's hard to, I definitely think our Sunday school doesn't cover what we cover. So they're not necessarily getting doctrine in the Sunday school class. We don't really have a good children's curricula for that. And then kids don't really have a good, it's very abstract, and they have nothing to compare it to. And then they don't get like a history lesson. It's like, a lot of people are drawn to the Orthodox Church because of the history of the church and the apostolic succession and what that all means for where we are today. But we don't have a curricula for history, church history. You only get 45 minutes if we're lucky, once a week. So that's something we can improve. Sunday school itself is a Western model. The church used to not be that way. Used to be like you're coming for the feast days and then you bring it home and you're celebrating the rest of the day at home. I was listening to one program saying, our rituals, while we don't always understand why our rituals are here, what we're doing, our rituals, it's the way we always did it, right? But it preserves the culture and it preserves the teaching generationally, right? And in our American culture, a pledge allegiance to the flag, the national anthem, a Memorial Day, Veterans Day, they preserve knowledge of our history in our society of people. But, we want to call it something else. We don't want to do the pledge anymore. We want to remove all these things. We lose part of our identity of who we are as a nation. Even within our church, we start removing, these are just dead rituals. But this was the Sunday school of the former generations. We bless the water and then we take the water home and bless our homes. And we have this connection to Epiphany. We learn about the baptism of Jesus, right? We bake the breads. There's so many breads. Soreki for Easter, we use eggs in it and butter. But what's the other one? Lazarokia. It's a bread we use for Saturday of Lazarus. It's Lenten. It's Lenten friendly, and Christosomo,
The Christmas bread.
the Christmas bread.
Almost like a fruitcake, but a lot better.
Almost like a fruitcake, a lot better. There's the Vasilopita at the beginning of the year. There's the Artoclasia that we use on feast days of the church. And so you would have historically families baking this bread together as family. Usually it's Yaya and Mama teaching us to do it. And why we baking bread again? Well, let me tell you why we're baking bread again. And you learn about the tradition of the church. First day of Lent, Marina Beasley tells me they fly kites in Greece, and it's the prayer that our souls rise up to heaven and this freedom in God, that sort of thing, as we prepare for the fast. Our little rituals help secure and maintain the identity of our faith. And we see over time, well, the churches are stripped down to bare walls. Maybe we don't have a cross because, well, Jesus isn't on the cross anymore. Yeah, I get it. But it's through the cross that he dies for us. And in his death, he destroys death. Oh, but we don't want to think of him on the cross. And we remove the cross. We remove the lives of the saints. We lose our history. And I had a friend ask me, "You're a pastor, right?" I'm like, "Sure, I'm a pastor." And they're like, "We want our marriage blessed in the eyes of God before our wedding." That's what I did. I shook like, "What?" And she's like, "Isn't it true that to have it blessed by God, you haven't done it with a preacher and like two witnesses?" And I don't even begin to explain what we do and how we understand marriage in the Orthodox Church, because that's completely wrong. It's like everything you just said, it was completely wrong. There was a movie. And I told her, go talk to your pastor, because I know she goes to church. And I don't think she's ever met her pastor. And I'm like, what? You've been going for like 2 years to this place. But there's so many people and there's so many groups, and I'm like, I can't help you with that because it's not this. If you want to do it this way, I'd be happy to talk to you. I'll talk all night. I might. And but everything's been so divorced or disconnected from meaning. And they sum it up as these are our traditions of man. And we would say, like, from our councils, they're not under Billy Madison is right. We are all now dumber because of everything you just said, right? Something to that effect. We've been disconnected from the meaning of why we do things. We disqualify it as traditions of man, and we recognize through the councils it's inspired by the Holy Spirit. The movements in the church, we understand it to be inspired by the Holy Spirit, not just, oh, I felt like doing it this way. I felt like dressing like this, and because I want to dress like this, I want you all to dress like this. Like, that's not how the tradition grows in the church. I will say how it is today isn't how it always was, but there's a natural evolution to growth in the church, to the way things are done. I think the printing press helped solidify things to be one way, but up to that point, it was evolving over time. New hymns are entered into the church, and it's the way the church grows and matures. But all the tradition comes to preserve the teaching, preserve the movement, and the culture within the church. You do away with that, and then it's hard to tell a concert from a worship service. See, I bring it all back together. We will do a lesson on marriage. We will. We'll get to that. I saw your hand go up. No, just scratch it. All right. All right. Anyone else? All right, it's 8 o'clock. Go home. Thank you for joining us online. Thank you for being with us today. Do that.
Thank
Thanks,
you, Father
Father.
Nick. Thanks.
Have a good night.
Good night, guys. Have a good
Have a
night.
good
Good
night.
night.
Father.
Good night.